We stay here. We stay here. We have to go to UK.
Many are joining much calmer queues today, waiting for buses to take them to shelters to other parts of France. It's thought more than half of the migrants have already left. But aid workers believe thousands may have disappeared without the authorities knowing, raising concerns new camps could be springing up nearby. And some French politicians believe the destruction of the jungle is simply not enough.
On les voit encore arriver à Calais aujourd'hui. We still have them arriving in Calais today. So I think to say that there will no longer be a camp for migrants in Calais is not true. And what I'm calling for, after we've waited for this demolition of the camp for so long, is guarantees. What is the President of the Republic's plan to prevent these camps and the arrival of the migrants in Calais?
Authorities hope the camp will be cleared by Friday, but only time will tell if this is just a crisis that is being shunted elsewhere. Frankie McCamley, BBC News.
Well, many of the people you see in the queue behind me, they don't want to get on buses. They say that they're under 18 and they're hoping to go to the processing centre, get a wristband and be able to stay in secure part of the camp that will remain during this demolition. I'm joined here by Dorothy Sang from Save the Children. Dorothy, we now know the French authorities are saying that 772 under 18s have been processed, as they say, and either gone to the UK or are now in that secure part of the camp. How would you say that part of this operation is going?
I'd say we were still deeply concerned about hundreds of children that we know weren't part of that registering process yesterday, were unable to register. Last night, going into the evening, I sat with a group of teenage boys who were not able to register, and one of them, a 15-year-old boy, who'd had all of his possessions stolen, and he didn't know where he was sleeping that night. We know hundreds of children slept on their own in the jungle whilst houses, tents were burning down around them. People tell us that lots of them ran last night, and we can't account for them.
I mean, we've seen the scenes. You and I have been walking around that camp. It must be incredibly scary, particularly if you're young.
Of course, it's really, really frightening. And actually, this whole process, the lack of information, children not knowing when they're going to be registered, queuing to register, then being sent back. This is creating a dangerous situation for children that was totally unavoidable.
The French authorities have said that it will be cleared by the end of the week. Do you foresee that happening?
There's a real lack of information here, and what Save the Children is calling for is for there to be for the demolition to be stopped. Whilst there's this unclear picture about where children are, we cannot guarantee their safety, and with having bulldozers come in and dismantling the structures in which they've been staying in is creating panic and confusion.
Even for those who are lucky enough, I use that term loosely, to remain, what kind of life are they going to have here while all this demolition is going on around them, even in that secure area?
Exactly. I mean, where these 700 plus children are staying is right in the epicenter of the jungle. So when the bulldozers come in and they start to take down that infrastructure, which we know from last time is quite a distressing sight, we can't guarantee that the children aren't going to want to get out of that environment. I mean, it would be very, very frightening for everyone.
Okay, Dorothy Sang from Save the Children, thank you very much indeed. Well, you can probably make out behind me, if I can just get Pete to pan around. That is the smoke that you can see coming out of the jungle at the moment. There are still people inside that camp. The French authorities have said they don't want to use force, but if people refuse to leave, then they will need to intervene. Many people, as you can see, still coming out and forming queues to get on the buses that are taking them to other parts of France. Others are just leaving of their own volition. I passed a man as I was coming here this morning who had just one carrier bag with him. I asked him where he was going. He said he was off to Paris. We'll keep you updated, Julian, throughout the morning. Back to you.
Sophie, thank you very much. Sophie Long there in Calais. Now, the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, says the third runway for Heathrow may include a flyover to allow planes to take off over the top of the M25. The government yesterday gave the go-ahead for the airport to expand, but opponents have vowed to fight the plans. Mr. Grayling said a ramp over the motorway would be more cost-effective than a tunnel under the runway. It's an issue likely to come up when Theresa May faces MPs at Prime Minister's questions. That's in the next hour, of course. Well, our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is there for us at Westminster. Norman, good morning.
Morning, Julian. Well, we are getting a sense of the difficulties building a third runway is going to entail. We've had the political decision, but now we know of the legal difficulties, with 4 Conservative councils threatening to mount legal challenges to the decision, largely on the grounds of air pollution and probably noise too. We know 2 of the construction difficulties, with Mr. Grayling revealing this morning that potentially the third runway could be built with a sort of hill over the M25 for the planes to take off on. The argument being that having to move the M25 or to tunnel it under the runway would be even more expensive. Perhaps more importantly than that, would cause chaos for potentially months for motorists. And of course there are the political difficulties. We know the likes of Boris Johnson and Justine Greening have already signalled their opposition. Zach Goldsmith has announced that he is going to trigger a by-election. And interestingly, the government, very unusually, have decided they won't contest it. They will not put up an official Conservative candidate to challenge Zach Goldsmith. Instead, they've gone out of their way to praise Mr. Goldsmith in an attempt, it seems to me, to diffuse the potential backlash and impact of this referendum. Just have a listen to what the Transport Secretary, Mr. Grayling, had to say about Zach Goldsmith this morning.
I'm sorry about Zach's decision, but Zach is a man of principle. He's said for a long time that he believes strongly we shouldn't be doing this. He and I don't agree on this. There are a lot of things we do agree on. We don't agree on this. And I wish Zach all the very best for the future. I wish he hadn't taken this decision. But the reality is you can only do the world as it is rather than how you'd like it to be.
Now, interestingly, Boris Johnson and Justine Greening at the moment have been fairly muted and restrained in their criticism. Colleagues of Mr. Johnson have suggested that he's not going to be a leading campaigner against Heathrow. And this morning, Justine Greening, when given the opportunity again to voice her concerns when she left home, well, she really didn't say much at all.
Good morning, Miss Greening. Andy from the BBC. Can we talk to you about the Heathrow decision? What's your reaction? Will you be resigning from the Cabinet? Do you think it's undeliverable, as Boris Johnson says?
So a not very communicative Justine Greening there, staying mum. She could have, if she'd wanted, gone on the attack over Heathrow, but I think significant she deliberately chose not to do that. And that is the sense we are getting from Boris Johnson and Justine Greening. They do not plan to lead some sort of putative revolt against Theresa May over Heathrow. And that will come as huge comfort to the Prime Minister, because if she can manage this politically, it'll be an awful lot easier to make Heathrow happen.
Norman, thank you very much. Norman Smith there at Westminster. Prime Minister's questions, of course, at midday. The headlines now on BBC Newsroom Live. Fires destroy parts of the jungle migrant camp in Calais. It's not clear who started them. Clearance work by the French authorities continues. The third runway at Heathrow Airport could involve planes taking off from what's been described as a ramp over the M25. That's according to the Transport Secretary. And Vodafone is fined £4.6 million for failing customers in the UK, a record amount for a phone service provider. Now let's catch up with the sports news, and that comes from Jessica. Jessica, good morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you. A survey has found that the majority of sports fans would be comfortable with their club signing a gay player. The online poll by Radio 5 Live was answered by 4,000 people and found that 82% of them wouldn't have an issue with it. The most high-profile male footballer to come out in recent times is former Aston Villa player Thomas Hitzlsperger. He said his sexuality wasn't a problem in the dressing room, but he didn't reveal it until after he'd retired. There's only ever been one male player to come out while still playing, Justin Fashanu, back in 1990. His career suffered for it, though, and he took his own life 8 years later. Daniel Sturridge impressed in Liverpool's 2-1 win over Tottenham in the EFL Cup. His 2 goals was the ones that put Reds through to the quarter-finals. All of Sturridge's goals so far this season have come in the Cup, and it took him less than 10 minutes to add to his tally. A real poacher's goal there. He doubled their lead in the second half with this goal. And as he puts that in the back of the net, of course, the obligatory dance moves, as we've become used to seeing. With England Rugby Union's lengthy injury list, head coach Eddie Jones has had to call in reinforcements ahead of the autumn internationals. Northampton flanker Tom Wood returns to the side. He already has 42 caps to his name, but is yet to feature under Jones. Also recalled is Gloucester's Johnny May. The squad will fly to Portugal on Sunday for a training camp before playing South Africa at Twickenham on the 12th of November. And in cricket, England have named an unchanged squad for next month's tour of India. There's still no place for fast bowler James Anderson, who is expected to miss the first couple of tests through injury. So Nottinghamshire's Jake Ball remains in the squad. 4 spinners, including 39-year-old Gareth Batty, would also tour India in the spin-friendly conditions. That's all the sport for now. We'll have more on the BBC News Channel throughout the day.
Jessica, thank you very much indeed. Now let's talk more about Vodafone's problems. Fined £4.6 million for failing customers in the UK, a record amount for a phone service provider. The communications regulator Ofcom found serious and sustained breaches of consumer protection rules by the company. Vodafone has admitted the breaches and has apologised. Well, Lindsay Fussell is the Consumer Group Director for Ofcom. She explained why the fine had been issued.
3 things had gone badly wrong at Vodafone. First, they charged 10,000 of their pay-as-you-go customers for services that they didn't receive, for money they put on their phones, for which they didn't receive credit. Secondly, they gave those customers inaccurate bills. And thirdly, their complaints handling processes just weren't up to scratch. And that's why we've levied this record fine, £4.6 million today.
With me, Ben Thompson. If it is a record fine, presumably it's looking to send a signal to others, among other things.
Yeah, this is the culmination of an 18-month inquiry into customer complaints against Vodafone, and it's not the first time the regulator has fined a telecoms firm. It fined EE and TalkTalk a lot of money over the past couple of years for similar misdemeanours. But this is the biggest against a telecoms firm, and as you heard there, it was to do with billing problems. Basically, Vodafone was moving a lot of customers from an old billing system, an IT system, to its new one. The idea was that they would all merge onto one system, but as time and time again we've heard, IT systems don't always work as they're supposed to, and there were a lot of problems, and crucially it comes down to the billing, and it meant that a lot of customers who were on pay-as-you-go phones were buying the top-ups for those phones, but that money was not being credited to their account. So Ofcom found that over a 17-month period, it cost those customers collectively £150,000. But also it's the way that Vodafone dealt with those complaints that was found to be at fault. It failed to identify them quickly enough. Its staff weren't trained properly to be able to respond to those concerns. And crucially, Ofcom found that Vodafone only started tackling the problem when the regulator got involved, and it said, look, you need to be more proactive and sort this out yourself. So the problem comes down to not only the billing, but how it handled those complaints. Vodafone, we should say, says it's fully refunded all of the money to the customers who were affected. It's been apologising all morning for those errors, but nonetheless, a record fine for a telecoms firm, £4.6 million.
OK. Ben, thanks very much indeed for that. Now, treating children with autism from the age of 2 can significantly reduce the severity of their symptoms and sustain the improvement over 6 years. That's according to a groundbreaking study. The research by King's College in London and the Universities of Manchester and Newcastle is the first to identify a long-term effect on the condition after early intervention. Well, we can speak now to the entrepreneur, Dame Stephanie Shirley, whose late son Giles was profoundly autistic, and her Shirley Foundation has funded more than £50 million to autism projects, and she acts as an ambassador for the Autism Alliance. Welcome to you. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
I wonder how you react to this research study and the principal messages emerging from it.
I think for all parents it is enormously exciting when a new intervention is not only announced, but announced that it has been measured and monitored and that it is better than placebo. In other words, it's better than me just sitting alongside that child and going through the alphabet or something like that, just giving him or her attention. But also, it's pleasing to me as a philanthropist because this is a project that has been funded by Autistica and funded by the Shirley Foundation. We put £50,000 in 2012. And after many, research is terribly slow. The research is so, there's only about a 10% chance of anything that you do coming out with anything useful. And this seems positive. The Lancet has given it, it's been peer reviewed. Manchester University has had a focus on early diagnosis for years, and my foundation has funded some of that work. And of course, as soon as you have diagnosis, what you want to do is, right, we now know this is happening. What can we actually do to make it better? And it seems as if this project shows procedures that parents can do without too much hassle and without losing respect for the child. And actually make a real difference.
Just to explain specifically what the research has looked at, as I understand it, parents have been filmed interacting with their young children. Experts have been alongside them as they look back at that film and have hinted at areas where communication might have taken place where perhaps it didn't at the time. Is that about the sum of it?
Well, this is it. We always say parents are experts in their own children, but actually we need training too as to do the right thing for the child at the right timing. And some of that is not intuitive. We have to be helped to get that right.
And in this case, clearly that has happened. And what's also interesting is how long-lasting the effects, we're told, of this approach could be.
Yes, starting at 2 years sounds absolutely fine, but of course a lot of autism doesn't exhibit itself until about 2, 2.5, 3. So I'm slightly worried about that, but obviously they've got some good results. These are quality universities combining together on a worthwhile project, and it's great. It looks as if we found not the causes of autism, not a cure for autism, but a way of making the really difficult, vulnerable children, making their lives a bit better.
Good to have your thoughts. Thank you very much for coming on, Dame Stephanie Shirley there. The UK's water companies are campaigning for tough measures to try to stop people flushing wet wipes into the sewage system. They want a ban on manufacturers labelling wet wipes as flushable. Jane McCubbin has been investigating.
Britain loves wet wipes. Toilets hate them. Andrew knows only too well. Here in Barry, to unblock yet another blockage, he'll do about 5 a day.
Yep, there is something on the end of this.
Ugh. Blockages are a £7 million a year problem in Wales. He says there's one prime culprit.
Wet wipes. And what looks to be dental floss. People say they don't flush wet wipes, and all of a sudden the cause of the blockage is wet wipes or flushable wipes. They do say flushable on them, they do flush away, but unfortunately they just don't break up in the sewers. The 2/3 of our blockages for Welsh Water Company.
So just how flushable is flushable? Let's do a little test. This is loo roll. In a few minutes, it's pretty much disintegrated. Not so the flushable wet wipes, which Trade Association itself tells me can take up to 3 hours to fully disintegrate, and that is if they follow the voluntary code. If they don't, it could take far longer. That voluntary code is set by the manufacturers themselves. Let's see this test. But in this lab, they've created a far more stringent test.
Nothing gets anywhere close to passing.
Nowhere close to passing.
Nowhere close to passing. Nowhere close.
And this flushability test is the only test recognised by the water industry. You've tested all the big brands here. What do you make of that 3-hour claim? Do they?
No, most of them don't break down in 3 hours. In fact, some we've tested for 3 days or even 3 weeks, and they still do not break down.
And that is a problem for people like Andrew off on another call in South Wales, because a domestic blockage above ground can look like this below ground. A lot can stick to a wet wipe if they don't break down quickly. The water companies say action must be taken. Take flushable off the labels or come up with a better product. You've thrown out a challenge, haven't you, to the industry?
Yes, we've thrown out a challenge to the industry, to the manufacturers, to say if you have a wipe that would pass the UK guidelines, come and get it tested at WRC, or show us the results of your own testing?
Nobody has.
Nobody has.
They say your flushables aren't flushable.
We know that they are. The wipes industry has made a huge amount of investment into making flushable wipes products as weak as possible for when they enter the water networks. The biggest problem are people putting things down the toilet that should never be there in the first place.
Work is underway on a new international standard, agreed by both manufacturers and the water industry, but that will still only be voluntary. As wet wipe demand continues to grow, so too will the problem of blockages. Jane McCubbin, BBC News.
Now, temperatures have been rising in the tent, and tonight we will finally discover who will be crowned the Great British Bake Off champion. But of the final three contestants, whose meringues will reach new peaks and whose sponges will sag? We're asked to gauge opinion, but a bakery where we've been to talk to the former finalist, Luis Troiano, and some of his customers.
The Bake Off really changed my life. I was a graphic designer beforehand. I used to work in an advertising agency, and well, now I own a bakery in the village where I live at Poynton. So yeah, it's been a massive change for me. It's been a bit of a roller coaster since I came out of the Bake Off. Things happened that I didn't expect.
On your mark, get set, and bake.
I think some of the tasks have been really different this year, and it's been things that, I've had to look up some of the tasks that they've had to make as well. But I think it's the closest final we've ever had, do you?
Oh, yes, yeah, because they've all had ups and downs,
They have. Who do you think's going to win the final? Who's your money on?
Andrews.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
What, you both think?
Yeah.
I'd love Andrew to win.
Would you?
Yeah, he's been really, really good, and yeah, really rooting for him.
Good job, good sponge, good flavour.
I always want to eat when it's actually on. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I'm actually very hungry. We all feel like we could have a go, even though I could never do anything like that. It's got kids being interested again in baking, which I think is good.
You've made two cracking fondant fancies. They don't look so brilliant, but they're stunning.
You said it's gone to Channel 4 then?
Yeah, I like Channel 4, but I don't know why they have to sell out.
Yeah.
When it is such an iconic programme for the bee.
I love it. I just hope it carries on in the same way it has.
And what makes you watch the Bake Off? What's your favourite aspect of it?
It's the missus who makes me watch it, to be fair. And it's a secret guilty pleasure, wanting to be able to bake like that.
The key thing about the Bake Off is it's always meant to be something that you can have a go at yourself. I think as well, the competition side is really serious. I don't know, it's just got a bit of everything, hasn't it?
Former Bake Off finalist Luis Troiano there. Just to show you some live pictures that we have coming into us here at the BBC, which I was about to show you, but sadly we can't at this very minute. They were of now some quite significant fires burning in Calais. We'll be back there in the next half an hour. The headlines coming up on the BBC News channel. Goodbye to viewers on BBC Two. First, though, a look at the weather from Peter Gibbs.
Thanks very much, Julian. A different feel to the weather, actually, over the next couple of days. The winds are switching direction, so it's going around to more of a southwesterly, which is bringing in milder air from the Atlantic. We're losing that chilly easterly wind that we've had for the last couple of weeks. Mind you, bringing a lot of cloud in from the Atlantic as well. And you can see these stripes of cloud. These are weather fronts that are producing just a little bit of patchy rain. So one pushing out of Northern Ireland, Scotland into Northern England. Another down across the Midlands into Wales could just give a few spots of rain for a time. But either side of those bands of thicker cloud, some sunshine coming through, some sunshine.
watching the shot panning around the area over the last few moments, and it does seem that those fires are spreading, both in terms of the extent of the area now affected by them, and how some of them, as you can see here, are now raging quite significantly, and no sign, at least on that shot, of much being done to try and counter that specific fire, although we know, of course, that there are fire officers on the scene trying as best they can to put some of those fires out. But that's the scene live in the jungle camp at the moment. Now, the offensive to retake Mosul from the terror group Islamic State continues, with most Iraqi government and Kurdish forces still some distance from the city itself. But a group of special forces advancing from the east are now only 3 miles from the outskirts of the city. Our correspondent, Ayman Ogana, is with them and sent this report.
هذا الهدف الرئيسي اللي رايحين اذا البيشمرك
member for Broxtowe expressed concern of the automotive and aerospace industries, while the British Banking Association said its members are poised, quivering over the relocate button. Every day the Prime Minister dithers over this chaotic Brexit, employers delay investment, and there are rumours circulating about relocation. This cannot carry on until March of next year. When is the Prime Minister going to come up with a plan?
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, I think the fact that he seems to confuse a customs union with a border, where they are actually two different issues, shows why it is important that it is this party that is in government and dealing with these issues, and not his. He talks about the plan. I've been very clear. I've been very clear that we want to trade freely with both trade with and operate within the single European market. I want this country to be a global leader in free trade. The Labour Party is against free trade. I want to introduce control on free movement, so that we have an end of free movement. The Labour Party wants to continue I want to deliver on the will of the British people. He is trying to frustrate the will of the British people.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was no answer on the border, which was the question. And on Monday, Mr. Speaker,